When bloodlines go to war, the courtroom turns into the battlefield where secrets bleed louder than witnesses. This isn't just about inheritance, it's about exposure. Studies show that nearly 70% of inheritance disputes reveal long-buried family betrayals rather than just disagreements over property. And in your case, that statistic came alive in full color. The estate wasn't simply an asset, it was the stage where masks slipped, greed took center stage, and hidden crimes lined up in plain view. The suspense, criminal charges are now circling like vultures. The very people who dragged you into the courtroom to prove you didn't belong are now the ones being escorted into the defendant's seat. It's almost poetic. The same gavel they tried to weaponize against you is now echoing against their own names. And let's be honest, if family drama was a sport, yours just qualified for the Olympic Games. What started as who gets what spiraled into a full-blown saga that even Netflix would reject for being too unbelievable. Yet here you are, not only walking away with your rightful inheritance, but watching their carefully built empire crumble under the weight of their own lies. This case wasn't just won, it was survived. It was exposed. And now, with criminal charges loading, the world is about to learn what you already knew. You weren't just fighting for property, you were fighting for truth. And truth doesn't lose. Number one, winning the case wasn't just about money. It was about identity. Winning this inheritance case was never just about money. It was about your identity, the very core of who you are and where you come from. The courtroom wasn't just a place where documents were read and signatures were checked. It became the place where your existence was put on trial. They weren't only fighting to keep land or assets from you, they were trying to erase your name from the family story, as if you were an unwanted footnote. That's why your victory stings them so deeply. It wasn't the dollars that cut them. It was the undeniable proof that you belonged and that no amount of lies or manipulation could remove you. The truth is, inheritance battles are rarely about estates. They're about recognition. They're about who gets to claim legitimacy and who gets cast out as if they were never part of the bloodline. And you saw that play out in real time. Every insult, every side eye, every attempt to paint you as undeserving was an attempt to say, you don't matter. But when the judge ruled in your favor, it wasn't just a legal win. It was the universe stamping a seal of acknowledgement on your life. What makes this so powerful is that your enemies weren't only fighting for property, they were fighting to protect the false image they built of themselves as the rightful heirs. If you had lost, they could have gone on pretending that history was exactly the way they told it. They could have kept pretending that you were the outsider, but your win destroyed that narrative. Suddenly, all the whispers they spread about you being less than collapsed under the weight of the verdict. They couldn't erase you, they couldn't rewrite you, they couldn't bury you under their lies. That's why the case felt so much bigger than a courtroom battle. It was an identity war. You walked out, not just with assets in your name, but with a public declaration that you were never the imposter they tried to make you out to be. And now every time they look at you, they're forced to swallow the bitter truth. You didn't just win money. You reclaimed your place. You reminded them that legacy doesn't bend to jealousy, and bloodlines don't lie just because people do. Number two, their real fear wasn't losing assets. It was losing control over narrative. Their real fear in this inheritance case was never about losing money. It was about losing control of the story they've been telling for years. For people like this, wealth is just one part of power. The bigger weapon they hold is the ability to shape how everyone sees them. The family's pillars, the responsible ones, the rightful heirs. When you stepped into that courtroom and fought back, you didn't just challenge their wallets. You challenged the carefully polished image they've been hiding behind. That's why their anger is so raw. It's not just that you received what was rightfully yours, but that your victory forced the truth into public record. Before this case, they could manipulate the story in private. They could whisper behind your back, twist facts at family gatherings, and convince others that you were undeserving. But the courtroom doesn't bow to gossip. It deals in evidence. And the moment the judge ruled in your favor, their version of the family history collapsed. No matter how much they deny it now, that verdict is proof that they lied, manipulated, and schemed to keep you out. The loss of narrative control is worse than the loss of money for people who build their entire reputation on appearances. They thrive on being seen as the ones who handled everything or sacrificed the most. When the truth showed they were actually the ones blocking justice, it didn't just bruise their pride, it exposed their fraud. Suddenly all the relatives and onlookers who once believed their polished stories started asking questions. If they lied about you, what else have they been lying about? That suspicion spreads faster than wildfire, and it shakes the foundation they worked so hard to protect. Your win became their public unmasking. They can't spin this into another story of you being unworthy because the law itself shut their mouths. And that's the real wound they can't heal from. It's not the property, the land, or the money. It's the fact that their power to dictate the narrative is gone. You didn't just collect an inheritance, you ripped away their illusion of control. And in doing so, you forced them to face what terrifies them most, a truth they can no longer bury. Number 3. The criminal charges are karma in legal clothing. The criminal charges surfacing after your inheritance case are not random. They are the natural fallout of everything they tried to bury. People love to talk about coincidence, but there's nothing coincidental about the way corruption, greed, and deceit eventually circle back on those who practice them. What they plotted against you in secret has been dragged out into the open, and now the very system they thought would crush you is turning its spotlight on them. It's almost poetic. The courtroom that was meant to humiliate you has become the place where their own actions are finally catching up with them. When people fight dirty in inheritance battles, they often expose more than they intended. In trying to prove you didn't belong, they overstepped. They forged documents, lied under oath, twisted facts, and left trails they never expected anyone to follow. The irony is that if they had simply left you alone, none of these skeletons would have been unearthed. But greed is impatient, and desperation makes people sloppy. Every false move they made in their attempt to block you has now become evidence in a case against them. The deeper truth here is that the justice system has a way of mirroring spiritual law. What you put out into the world finds its way back to you, and sometimes it comes back dressed as charges, subpoenas, and indictments. These individuals thought they could use the courts as a weapon against you, but instead the courts became the mirror reflecting their own crimes. They dug a pit for you and ended up trapped inside it themselves. This is why the news of charges being prepared shakes them more than the loss of inheritance itself. Losing money stings, but losing freedom terrifies. They can explain away losing an estate with excuses, but they cannot explain away criminal charges that follow them wherever they go. Their names, once used to intimidate you, are now being whispered with suspicion. Their power is crumbling not because you attacked them, but because the truth they tried to bury is now refusing to stay quiet. What this proves is simple. Justice doesn't always move fast, but it moves. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock politely, it breaks down the door. That's what's happening now. Their downfall isn't delayed karma, it's accountability arriving right on schedule. Number 4, the inheritance was the test, the trial was the trap. They believed the inheritance battle was going to be your downfall. To them, dragging you into court was a strategy, a way to exhaust your spirit, drain your resources, and humiliate you in front of everyone. They were convinced that once you were cornered by paperwork, lawyers, and endless hearings, you'd fold under the pressure. What they didn't realize was that the inheritance itself was never the true test for you. It was the trial that revealed who was really worthy and who was rotten to the core. The courtroom became the stage where masks cracked. What they thought would expose your weakness instead revealed their greed, their lies, and their lack of integrity. You showed up steady, even when the weight of the case tried to break you. They showed up desperate, and desperation always leaves evidence. Every false statement, every manipulative tactic, every exaggerated performance only made it clearer that they weren't protecting a legacy. They were trying to protect their illusions. That's what makes this so powerful. The trial flipped. It stopped being about you proving your worth and became about them proving their corruption. They thought the court would spotlight your supposed flaws, but the light turned on them and what was revealed couldn't be hidden again. They failed the test they didn't even realize they were taking. The inheritance case exposed how far they would go to try and erase you, and in the process it showed the world exactly who they really were. The trap they set for you became the pit they fell into themselves. The harder they tried to discredit you, the more they discredited themselves. What was meant to be your public humiliation became their public exposure, and that's why your victory cuts so deep, because it's not just about what you gained, but about what they lost. The illusion of power, the control over narrative, and the false sense of untouchability. At the end of the day, the inheritance was just property. The trial, however, was revelation. And while they were busy celebrating what they thought would be your breaking point, they walked straight into their own downfall. They didn't just lose the case, they failed the test. Number 5, every lie they told became evidence against them. Every lie they told in that courtroom ended up circling back as proof against them. They were so consumed with trying to discredit you that they didn't notice they were weaving a net that eventually trapped them. Arrogance does that. It blinds people to the holes in their own story. Instead of carefully presenting facts, they piled lie on top of lie, confident that no one would notice. But lies don't sit quietly. They clash with each other, they expose inconsistencies, and eventually they shout louder than the truth they were meant to cover. That's exactly what happened here. Their attempt to paint you as unworthy forced them into contradictions that couldn't be ignored. One document didn't match another. One testimony contradicted the next. And when pressed, their stories fell apart under their own weight. It wasn't the prosecutor's sharpness that doomed them. It was their own arrogance. They believed their position and influence would shield them, that a confident tone and a polished appearance would be enough to make their lies believable. But the courtroom has a way of stripping all that away. Once the evidence is laid out, charm and confidence can't save you. The irony is that if they had been honest, they might have walked away with dignity. But their obsession with destroying you blinded them to reason. They overreached, they exaggerated, they fabricated. And each falsehood turned into another brick in the wall, closing in on them. By the end, the very narrative they built to discredit you became the strongest evidence of their own corruption. This is why the judge couldn't ignore it. Judges see cases every day. They know the difference between a mistake and a pattern of deceit. In your case, the lies weren't occasional slip-ups. They were the foundation of their entire argument. And when the foundation cracks, the whole structure collapses. Their downfall wasn't caused by your aggression, but by their arrogance. They believed lies could carry them further than truth. And they underestimated how quickly dishonesty unravels under scrutiny. The same lies they thought would bury you ended up burying them instead. Their own words became the testimony against them, and there's no appeal strong enough to erase that. Number 6, you didn't just win, you exposed the machinery. You didn't just walk away with your rightful inheritance, you pulled the curtain back on an entire operation. This case was never just about property or money, it was about exposing the machinery that had been running in the shadows for years. What started as a fight over what belonged to you uncovered backroom deals, falsified documents, and the kind of corruption that thrives when no one dares to question it. By standing your ground, you forced everyone to look at what was really happening, and once the truth was out, it couldn't be shoved back into silence. That's why the fallout feels bigger than your victory. Courts don't ask about crimes unless something smells rotten, and you gave them more than a whiff. You gave them proof. The question shifted from who inherits this estate to who's been breaking the law to manipulate it. That's a different kind of spotlight, one that your enemies never expected to face. They wanted this to be a quiet burial of your rights, a quick erasure of your name from the records. Instead, the case turned into a full-scale investigation that threatens to swallow them whole. What makes this powerful is how your win revealed that the corruption wasn't random. It was a system. It wasn't just one person lying or one signature being forged. It was a chain of collusion, each part dependent on the other to survive. And once one link was broken, the entire chain fell apart. That's what your presence in the courtroom did. You didn't just demand your share, you disrupted their entire operation. Now, the people who thought they could bully you into silence are dealing with investigators, subpoenas, and the possibility of criminal records. They thought they were untouchable because they controlled the narrative and the paperwork. But arrogance blinds, and they never imagined their scheme would unravel in front of a judge. Your win turned the courtroom into a mirror, and what it reflected wasn't your weakness, it was their corruption. This is why your case will be remembered as more than an inheritance dispute. It was the moment hidden hands were exposed, and the game they played for so long was finally interrupted. You didn't just collect property. You forced accountability into the open, and once the machinery of corruption is exposed, it can never run the same way again. Number 7, their rage reveals they counted your portion before you ever received it. Their rage after your victory makes perfect sense when you realize what was really happening behind the scenes. They had already counted your portion as theirs long before the case was even decided. This wasn't just about keeping something from you. They had been living off what was meant for you. That's why the panic runs so deep. Your win wasn't only a gain for you, it was an eviction notice for them. It forced them to step out of a comfort they built on theft and deceit. Think about the audacity it takes to live as though your inheritance will never reach you. That's the mindset they carried. They spent the money, built their lives, and carried themselves as if you didn't exist. To them, you were already erased, and your portion was just another extension of their entitlement. But when the verdict flipped the script, it wasn't just about losing assets. It was about being exposed as people who had been eating from a table that was never set for them. This is why their fury feels unhinged. It's not the ordinary frustration of losing a case. It's the panic of being cut off from stolen benefits. They weren't prepared to adjust because they'd grown comfortable off your silence, off your exclusion, off your supposed defeat. And when you disrupted that arrangement, you didn't just reclaim your place, you dismantled their lifestyle. Their anger is a cover for their fear, because deep down they know they'll never taste that kind of stolen ease again. What your victory revealed is that their greed was never about future possession. It was about ongoing exploitation. They were already living off resources they didn't earn, already flexing with an inheritance they hadn't rightfully secured. And now, every bit of that has been yanked back into the light. The shockwaves are hitting them harder because you didn't just prove you belonged. You proved they were leeches feeding off what didn't belong to them. That's why your win feels like a demolition to them. It stripped away not only their access to your portion, but the illusion that they were rightful heirs. Your victory forced them out of stolen comfort and back into reality. And for people who built their identity on lies, reality is the harshest eviction notice of all. Number 8, the judge saw through the polished masks. The judge saw straight through the polished masks your opponents tried to wear. Courtrooms are often full of performances, rehearsed speeches, carefully chosen outfits, exaggerated emotions meant to sway opinion. But no matter how well they rehearsed, energy doesn't lie. You can fake documents, you can memorize lines, but you can't fake the weight of entitlement versus the steady current of truth. And in that room, the contrast was undeniable. They thought theatrics would be enough to win. Tears at the right moment, dramatic pauses, inflated stories about sacrifice and loyalty. All of it designed to paint them as noble heirs and you as the undeserving outsider. But what they underestimated was the intuition that comes with authority. Judges aren't strangers to performance, they see it every single day. They know when someone is telling their truth and when someone is scrambling to protect a lie. And in your case, the difference was glaring. The judge picked up on what words couldn't cover, the desperation in their delivery, the cracks in their stories, the way greed leaked out no matter how hard they tried to hide it. By contrast, your stance wasn't decorated with theatrics. You didn't need to play a role because the truth didn't require a costume. That authenticity cut through their performance in ways they couldn't compete with. The irony is that the very masks they believed would protect them became the reason for their undoing. The judge saw right through the shine and polish, down to the arrogance that sat underneath. And when entitlement stands next to truth, entitlement always loses its shine. This is why the verdict carried so much weight. It wasn't just about evidence on paper, it was about credibility and spirit. The court recognized that what they were pushing was not justice, but performance, not fairness, but manipulation. And while they may have convinced others with their masks for years, the courtroom became the place where those masks finally cracked. In the end, the judge didn't rule in your favor out of sympathy. They ruled in your favor because truth has a resonance that no performance can mimic. And once it was felt, no polished mask could hide the emptiness behind their words. Number 9, the case proved blood doesn't always mean family. This case proved once and for all that blood doesn't always mean family. The people who should have stood with you were the very ones trying to bury you, not just in paperwork, but in shame and exclusion. An inheritance fight has a way of stripping away all the polite masks, and what it revealed here was brutal. DNA doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes those closest to you by blood are the quickest to turn into your enemies. They weren't just fighting for property, they were fighting to erase you. And that's the kind of betrayal that cuts deeper than any financial loss ever could. Because it's one thing for strangers to oppose you, but it's another level of cruelty when people who share your lineage decide that their comfort, greed, and image matter more than your rightful place. They didn't care about fairness, they cared about control. And in their eyes, your existence was a threat to the narrative they wanted to maintain. But here's the truth the case made impossible to ignore. Family isn't defined by who shares your last name or your DNA. Family is defined by who stands up for you when it counts. When the courtroom became a battlefield, none of them fought for you. None of them defended you. Instead, they tried to bury you under lies, and yet truth stood taller than all of them. The victory you walked away with wasn't handed to you by family support. It was forged by resilience, evidence, and the weight of justice itself. That revelation is both painful and liberating. Painful, because it forces you to accept that those you expected loyalty from chose betrayal instead. Liberating, because it frees you from the illusion that blood automatically equals love. The case ripped off the veil and showed you who really belongs in your corner. And it wasn't them. In the end, your inheritance wasn't just property, it was clarity. It showed you who was truly for you and who was against you. Even if they carried the same bloodline, family didn't carry you through this. Truth did. And that truth is what makes your victory even more powerful. They tried to bury you because they feared your rise. But the very thing they feared is exactly what happened. You rose anyway. Number 10. You survived psychological warfare, not just legal battles. You didn't just survive a legal case, you endured psychological warfare that was designed to break you long before the judge made a ruling. The sleepless nights weren't accidents. They were the result of relentless stress they intentionally created to wear you down. Every whisper campaign, every character assassination, every attempt to make you doubt yourself was part of a strategy. They wanted you so mentally exhausted that you would either give up or make mistakes that would hand them the victory. But you didn't crack. You stood through the storm even when your mind was under siege. That's what makes your win so much more powerful. It wasn't just about showing up in court with evidence. It was about showing up intact after everything they threw at you outside those walls. People underestimate how brutal these battles are because the damage isn't always visible. You can't always show receipts for sleepless nights or scars from being smeared in the community. But the truth is, the mental attacks were more vicious than the legal arguments. They were trying to break your spirit before they ever faced you in front of a judge. The smear campaigns were particularly cruel. They knew they couldn't erase you from the records, so they tried to erase your reputation instead. They tried to turn people against you, to isolate you, to make you look unstable or unworthy in the eyes of others. That was their silent weapon, not the lawyer's brief, but the steady drip of poison into the ears of anyone who would listen. And yet none of that stopped you. You walked into that courtroom carrying scars they hoped would silence you, and you turned them into strength instead. That's why your victory cut so much deeper than a legal win. You didn't just beat them with documents and arguments. You beat them by refusing to collapse under their psychological warfare. You showed them that no smear was strong enough to distort the truth, no rumor powerful enough to block justice, no sleepless night enough to rob you of your fight. Winning in court was the final step, but the real triumph happened long before the verdict, when you survived their attempts to destroy your mind and stood unshaken. That's a strength no lawyer can manufacture and no enemy can erase. Number 11, their criminal charges prove evil always overplays its hand. Their criminal charges are the clearest proof that evil always overplays its hand. If they had swallowed their pride and simply let you walk away with what was yours, the law might never have looked in their direction. They could have continued hiding behind their polished reputations, their false smiles, and their carefully managed lies. But greed doesn't know when to stop. It pushes people beyond reason, and in trying to take everything from you, they ended up exposing everything about themselves. That's the thing about corruption. It thrives in the dark, but it always crumbles when dragged into the light. By pushing the case further than it ever needed to go, they gave investigators, judges, and even bystanders a front-row seat to their schemes. Every forged paper, every twisted testimony, every underhanded maneuver was laid bare, and once those pieces were on the table, it was no longer just a family dispute. It became a question of law and accountability, something far bigger than their greedy intentions. What makes this so striking is how avoidable their downfall was. They weren't forced into this exposure, they chose it. In their arrogance, they thought they could outsmart the system the same way they tried to outsmart you. But the harder they pressed, the more mistakes they made. Their recklessness left trails, their lies contradicted one another, and their entitlement made them careless. Instead of walking away quietly with what was legitimately theirs, they risked everything in their obsession to strip you of yours. That obsession became the very rope they used to hang themselves. Now the irony is brutal. The inheritance they fought so viciously to keep out of your hands will never feel the same in theirs, because their names are now tied to criminal charges. They thought they were untouchable, that the law was just another stage where they could perform and win. But law doesn't bend forever, and when it breaks against the very people who abuse it most. Your win wasn't just about reclaiming what belonged to you, it was about letting their greed destroy them from the inside out. By refusing to let go of their schemes, they sealed their own fate. Evil never knows when to quit, and that's why it always collapses under the weight of its own excess. Number 12. What you inherited wasn't just property, it was vindication. What you inherited went far beyond houses, land, or money. Material possessions can be measured, counted, and even stolen, but the true prize you claimed was vindication. Every argument you made, every piece of evidence you presented, and every moment you stood firm in that courtroom wasn't just about securing an estate. It was about proving your worth in a way that no one could dispute. Your victory validated your place, not just in the legal sense, but in the moral and personal sense as well. It confirmed that all the attempts to discredit you, to erase you, and to convince the world you were undeserving had failed. That kind of vindication is rare. It reaches deeper than money ever could because it touches the very core of identity and dignity. The courtroom didn't just return your inheritance, it returned your name, your reputation, and the acknowledgement of your rightful place. People can try to steal property, twist stories, or manipulate perceptions, but once the law publicly affirms your truth, it becomes impossible for anyone to rewrite history in their favor. That acknowledgement is permanent, and it carries weight far beyond the estate itself. The significance of this victory extends across generations. When your name is cleared and your rights are recognized, you're not just healing yourself. You're healing the legacy that comes after you. Future family members, your children, and even those who come long after, will inherit the proof that standing firm against injustice works, that integrity is recognized, and that the truth has power that no one can take away. Material wealth can vanish, but the record of your vindication, the story of your triumph, remains untouchable. This inheritance case wasn't just a financial win. It was an act of reclamation. It erased years of manipulation and deceit aimed at undermining you. Every smirk, every false accusation, every attempt to paint you as undeserving was countered not by anger or retaliation, but by the undeniable truth revealed in the courtroom. That truth, recognized and validated by the legal system, is now part of your permanent legacy. You didn't just walk away with property, you walked away with your dignity, your honor, and the satisfaction of knowing that history itself now recognizes your worth. No one can repossess that. No one can challenge it without exposing themselves. And that is the real inheritance, the kind that lasts forever. Number 13, your victory forces others to question their own silence. Your victory didn't just affect the people who opposed you, it sent a shockwave through everyone who stayed silent while you fought. The relatives who whispered behind closed doors, the neighbors who nodded along but never spoke up, and the community members who avoided taking sides all had to watch as you not only survived but triumphed. Your win forces them to confront their own inaction, their own decision to stay quiet instead of standing for what was right. Silence can feel safe, but in the face of injustice it becomes complicity. And when you emerged victorious, that complicity was exposed in the harshest way possible. The irony is bitter. Those who avoided involvement did so thinking they were protecting themselves or staying out of trouble, but your success holds up a mirror. It shows that choosing silence didn't protect them at all. It just made them witnesses to the truth they refused to defend. Now everyone who stayed quiet is forced to acknowledge what they ignored, that you were right, that their hesitation or fear didn't prevent injustice, and that their passivity had consequences. Your victory becomes a lesson they can't unsee, a reminder that standing aside doesn't shield anyone from the ripple effects of wrongdoing. This effect is almost as powerful as the court ruling itself. While the judge's decision legally restored what was yours, the social reckoning is just as significant. It exposes not only your enemies but the cowardice of those who watched from the sidelines. They may try to rationalize their silence, but deep down, they know the truth. You fought when they wouldn't, and you won when they hoped to stay safe by avoiding involvement. Your triumph is a quiet indictment of inaction. It proves that truth doesn't need an army. It only needs resolve. And by standing firm, you forced others to reconsider their own choices, their own morals, and their own willingness to confront injustice. Your victory resonates beyond the courtroom, reshaping the way everyone who observed the battle will see courage, responsibility, and the consequences of staying silent in the face of wrongdoing. In the end, your win doesn't just reclaim what's yours. It changes how people perceive themselves, how they measure their courage, and how they reckon with their past decisions. Silence no longer protects them, and your victory ensures they can never ignore the truth again. Number 14. This case didn't just end, it rewrote legacy. This case didn't just reach a conclusion. It transformed the entire story of what was at stake. They believed the legacy would die with their manipulation, tainted and rewritten to suit their desires. They thought your name would be a footnote, erased from the record, and that history would remember their version of events as truth. But your fight changed all of that. By standing firm, presenting the evidence, and claiming what was rightfully yours, you didn't just win the estate, you reclaimed the narrative itself. The legacy they tried to control is no longer theirs to shape. What makes this so monumental is that legacy isn't just about land, money, or titles. It's about memory, influence, and what is passed down to those who come after. By securing your inheritance, you secured your place in that history. You turned what could have been a story of corruption, greed, and betrayal into a story of courage, perseverance, and undeniable truth. Future generations won't look back and see a scandal. They'll see a battle where justice finally reclaimed its pen and wrote the truth in bold letters. Your victory doesn't just reflect on the present, it sets the tone for decades to come. The same names that tried to dominate the story, manipulate the system, and silence you are now the ones who will be remembered for their failure. Your name, on the other hand, is forever linked with resilience and the reclaiming of what is right. That's the kind of inheritance no court document can fully capture, because it lives in the way people remember, teach, and honor the story. The rewriting of legacy is profound, because it shifts power, recognition, and moral authority. They may have thought that control over property and narrative could secure their place in history, but the truth they tried to bury cannot be erased. Your fight ensures that the chapter bearing your name is one of triumph, justice, and vindication. What they feared would be a scandal became a record of courage, and what they tried to suppress became the very testament of your victory. In the end, the inheritance wasn't just about assets. It was about restoring the story, rewriting history, and engraving your name permanently into the legacy that matters most, the truth. In the end, your victory in this inheritance case wasn't just about property, money, or legal documents. It was a triumph of truth over deception, courage over cowardice, and justice over greed. You didn't simply reclaim what was rightfully yours. You exposed the lies, dismantled the schemes, and forced the world to recognize your worth. Every lie they told, every attempt to discredit you, every act of betrayal became evidence of their own undoing. You survived psychological warfare, outlasted manipulation, and turned what was meant to be your breaking point into the stage for their downfall. This fight rewrote more than a family dispute. It rewrote legacy. You proved that blood doesn't automatically equal loyalty, that silence is complicity, and that true victory is not measured in assets alone, but in the vindication and clarity it brings. You reclaimed your place in history, ensured future generations see the strength it takes to stand for truth, and left no room for manipulation, deceit, or stolen narratives. What they tried to bury is now etched in the record. Your perseverance, your courage, and your unshakable resolve. And the most extraordinary part? Their greed and arrogance didn't just fail, it became their own trap. Criminal charges are looming, their schemes exposed, and the narrative they thought they controlled is now firmly in your hands. This victory is proof that the system bends toward truth, and that when someone refuses to be erased, even the most powerful schemes crumble. So today you don't just walk away with your inheritance. You walk away with your dignity intact, your name cleared, and a legacy rewritten in your honor. This is a triumph that no one can take from you, a vindication that will echo far beyond the courtroom, and a testament to the power of truth standing tall against deceit. If this story inspired you and showed what it truly means to stand unshakable in the face of betrayal, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another powerful story of courage and triumph. Hit that like button to show your support, leave a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and share this video with anyone who needs to witness how truth and perseverance always win. Your engagement helps amplify the message and reminds the world that justice, resilience, and courage always matter. God bless you.